She looked like any other woman struggling with heavy bags, until the man who helped her realized his simple kindness had just changed the rest of his life. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement as Michael hurried across the grocery store parking lot, one hand gripping a plastic bag threatening to split at the seams, and the other steadying a half-sleeping Emily against his hip. The girl had insisted on walking, but halfway to the car, she'd surrendered to her dad's arms, her tiny body worn out from school and errands. Michael didn't mind. These quiet, in-between moments were the best part of his day. Just as he reached the driver's side of their aging sedan, a sharp noise rang out behind him like a slap of plastic against concrete. He turned. 10 feet away, a woman was crouched on the ground, frantically trying to gather rolling cans of soup and runaway apples. A busted paper bag lay shredded beside her, the groceries scattering like marbles across the lot. A car door nearby beeped impatiently. Someone else glanced over and kept walking. Michael didn't even think. He gently set Emily into the back seat, told her to wait, and jogged over. "Hang on, I got it," he said, scooping up a dented can of beans before it rolled under a nearby SUV. The woman looked up, startled, then exhaled. "Oh, thank you. I'm so sorry." "No need to be," Michael replied, grabbing a pack of pasta and setting it back into a newer, sturdier bag she had nearby. "This stuff has a mind of its own." She chuckled softly, brushing her hair behind one ear. "Apparently." Up close, she looked composed but tired. Her clothes were clean, classy, but not flashy. Something about her didn't scream local, more like someone trying not to be noticed. Together they gathered the last of the spill. When the groceries were finally secured, she turned to him with a hesitant smile. "Seriously, thank you. You didn't have to." Michael shrugged, brushing off his hands. "It's what we do around here. You see someone struggling, you lend a hand." She nodded slowly, as if the idea was foreign but welcome. "Well, I'm grateful." He offered a polite nod and headed back to his car. She watched him go, her gaze lingering longer than she meant to, because something about the man who helped her without asking anything in return suddenly felt hard to forget. She knelt down to adjust the bag as Michael stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans, the faint trace of motor oil still clinging to his skin from the morning shift. The woman glanced up at him and offered a nervous laugh, one of those soft, deflective kinds that people give when they're embarrassed but trying not to show it. Her cheeks were flushed, maybe from the sun, maybe from something else. "I should have double-bagged," she muttered, shaking her head. "Rookie mistake." Michael smiled. "Happens to the best of us. Want me to grab you a new one from inside?" She waved him off, quickly brushing a strand of hair from her face. No, it's fine. Really, I've got extras in the trunk." He nodded, though he noticed the way her hands trembled just slightly as she lifted the rest of the groceries. Not fear, just fatigue, maybe. That kind of weariness that didn't come from physical labor, but from carrying something heavier than bags, something invisible. She wore a faded navy hoodie, the kind you pick from the back of a closet when comfort matters more than style. It hung loosely over a plain t-shirt and jeans, none of it designer or flashy. If she were anyone else, he might have assumed she was a teacher, or maybe a nurse on a day off, just another shopper trying to make it to dinner without dropping the eggs. But there was something else, too, something quiet in the way she moved, measured, as if she was used to watching people watch her. "Thanks again," she said, pausing before she shut the trunk. Not everyone would have stopped. Michael glanced toward his car, where Emily was waiting patiently in the back seat, face pressed to the window, waving. He waved back, then looked at the woman. Well, not everyone's raising a 7-year-old who reminds them what kindness looks like. That made her smile, and for a moment she looked more like a woman remembering something than one trying to forget. He tipped an imaginary hat and headed off, never thinking twice about the woman in the hoodie or the fact that she was already watching him like she hadn't been helped in a long time. The groceries were finally in the trunk, packed in with a kind of casual neatness that only came from experience. Michael closed it with a gentle thud and stepped aside, giving her room to slide into the driver's seat. She offered a nod of thanks, buckled in, and turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. The engine clicked, paused, and went dead. She tried again. Still nothing, just the faint sputtering sound of a battery begging for mercy. Her shoulders tensed. She exhaled slowly and stared at the dashboard like it had personally betrayed her. Michael hesitated, then walked back over. "Everything all right?" She forced a smile. "Yeah, I think it's just having a moment." She turned the key once more out of hope than strategy. The car coughed, blinked, and fell silent again. Michael tilted his head. "Pop the hood." She looked at him, surprised. "Are you?" He shrugged, already reaching for the front latch. "I run a garage about 6 blocks from here. You could say this is kind of my thing." She stepped out, a little embarrassed but visibly relieved. "I appreciate it. I swear, this thing picks the worst moments to act up." Michael raised the hood and propped it open. "They always do," he muttered, mostly to himself. Under the surface, the car was sleek and well-maintained, but something electrical wasn't right. He leaned in, checking the battery cables, brushing off dust, doing the quick mental math of what could go wrong with a model this refined. Behind him, she stood quietly, arms folded against the breeze. It wasn't bitterly cold, but the wind carried a whisper of winter in it. She looked around the lot, pretending not to feel out of place in a town like this, with a car like that, in a hoodie that didn't match the price tag of the wheels. "You're going to be fine," Michael said after a moment, tightening a loose connection. "Try it now." She stepped back into the driver's seat and turned the key again. This time the engine growled awake, smooth and sure, like it had never hesitated at all. She looked up at him through the windshield, that same quiet smile curling at the corner of her mouth. Michael gave her a small wave, grease on his fingers, as if saving strangers was just part of his Saturday routine. Michael leaned further under the hood, sleeves pushed up past his elbows, his fingers moving with the instinctive grace that comes from years of knowing engines better than most people. Sparks, pistons, tension belts. He could feel his way around them blindfolded. As he adjusted a stubborn bolt and double-checked the alternator connection, the low murmur of conversation floated toward him from the back seat of his car. Emily had rolled down her window and was now holding out a small juice box, her mitten-covered hands sticking through the open gap like a peace offering. "Do you want some? It's apple. I already had half, but I don't have any germs, I promise," she said seriously. The woman, taken aback at first, let out a soft, surprised laugh. She stepped closer, crouching down beside the car to meet Emily's eyes. "Thank you. That's very kind of you," she said gently, accepting the half-empty juice box with the same care someone might reserve for a priceless gift. Emily beamed. "You looked cold, and my dad says sharing is how we make strangers feel like neighbors." The woman blinked, clearly caught off guard by the warmth in those simple words. "Your dad sounds very wise." "He's the best," Emily said without hesitation. "He always fixes stuff, and he never gets mad even when our heater makes that weird sound at night." Michael glanced back, catching just a glimpse of their exchange. The woman was smiling now, genuinely. Not the polite, guarded kind she'd offered earlier, but something softer, almost nostalgic. She looked at Emily's boots, scuffed and 2 sizes too big, obviously handed down from someone else. There was a tear just above the heel, patched clumsily with duct tape. Still, Emily wore them like they were magic. "I love your boots," the woman said. Emily grinned. "Thanks. My cousin outgrew them. I think they make me faster." The woman chuckled again, holding the juice box like it had suddenly warmed her more than her coat ever could. And for that brief, quiet moment, sitting beside an old sedan in a small-town parking lot, she didn't feel like a CEO or a stranger. She just felt human, seen, invited in by a little girl with sticky hands and a heart wide open. The engine purred now, steady and smooth, like it had never thrown a fit in the first place. She shut the driver's side door gently and turned to where Michael stood, wiping his hands on a rag that had long since given up being clean. His sleeves were pushed back down, his brow still streaked with a smudge of grease he hadn't noticed. "That was incredible," she said, stepping closer. "You didn't even hesitate." Michael shrugged. "Wasn't much. Loose connection, weak battery ground. Happens sometimes. But still," she said, reaching into her coat pocket, "you saved me at least an hour of waiting, and probably a very cold one at that." She pulled out her wallet, sleek, black, and unmistakably expensive. From it, she slid out a crisp bill, then hesitated, as if unsure whether a 20 was enough, or maybe too much. Michael shook his head before she could even extend it. "Nah, keep it." Her hand froze. "Please, I insist." "I don't take tips for being decent," he replied, not unkindly. "It's just what folks do around here." She looked genuinely stunned, like the idea of help without an invoice was foreign to her, but it was real help, time, effort. He waved it off with the ease of someone who'd done this before and would again without a second thought. "It's no big deal, just a fix. Besides, you gave my kid someone to talk to. She's been quoting cartoons at me for days." The corner of her mouth lifted. "She's wonderful." "Yeah," Michael said softly with a nod. "She really is." The woman looked down at the folded bill in her hand, then back at him. Something shifted in her expression, respect maybe, or something even closer to awe. "Well, thank you, Michael." He nodded again, backing toward his car. "Drive safe, all right?" She watched as he climbed in, ruffled Emily's hair, and started the engine. No card handed out, no offer to connect, just a man doing good because that's how he believed the world should work. She didn't know it yet, but that refusal, the simple rejection of money in favor of kindness, would be the one detail she couldn't stop thinking about for the rest of the week. By the time she pulled out of the parking lot, the sky had melted into dusk. That soft, indigo stretch of evening where headlights start to matter and the world turns quieter. She didn't drive off right away, just sat in her car, hands resting on the steering wheel, engine idling. Her phone buzzed beside her, unread messages, missed calls, a calendar full of meetings she was supposed to attend hours ago. But all she could think about was him. The way he'd shrugged off her money like it meant nothing. The way he'd spoken to his daughter with such gentle certainty. The way he hadn't recognized her, not as a CEO, not as a face on magazine covers, not even as the woman who owned half the brands on the shelves inside that store. She turned onto the main road and started driving, just to clear her head, just to see where it would take her. She hadn't meant to follow him, not really. But when she saw the familiar shape of his car turning into a small side street near the town's edge, she slowed, then turned, and then, there he was. Michael stepped out of his car, scooped Emily into his arms like it was routine, and crossed the street to the modest brick apartment building tucked behind an old supermarket. It wasn't the building that stopped her, it was the sign. Whitmore Groceries. To stay. 1963. The lettering was worn, faded in places where decades of sun and snow had kissed it, but it was unmistakable. Her name, her family, the chain her grandfather started, the empire she had expanded. One of thousands across the country, and he lived beside it like it was just another piece of his world. She stared at it for a long time. It wasn't the irony that hit her hardest. It was the fact that he didn't seem to know or care. She rolled her window down, just slightly, as the wind carried laughter, his and Emily's, up through the quiet. And for the first time in years, Elise Whitmore felt completely invisible and strangely at peace with it. The boardroom smelled like polished wood, espresso, and pressure. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the 27th floor of the Whitmore Global Headquarters, offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. But Elise Whitmore wasn't looking at the view, not really. She sat at the head of the long, gleaming table, her posture perfect, her tailored black blazer untouched by even the smallest wrinkle. Her assistant clicked through slides at the far end, quarterly numbers, projections, brand expansion strategies. Elise nodded when appropriate, spoke when necessary, and took notes in a perfectly straight-lined leather notebook she never actually read again. The voices around her blurred. Sales in the Northeast were up. Supply chains were stabilizing. The new grocery app was ahead of schedule. All good news, all her doing. And yet, none of it touched her, because every few minutes her mind wandered, not to the next merger or the investor meeting in Milan, but to a parking lot, a broken paper bag, a mechanic with quiet eyes and hands that didn't hesitate to help. He hadn't known who she was. He hadn't asked. He'd just seen a person struggling and stepped in. It rattled her more than it should have. "Elise," someone said, jarring her back to the table. "Do we move forward with the partnership proposal?" She blinked. "Which proposal?" A slight pause. The CFO shifted uncomfortably. "The multi-market merger with Carrington Farms. You approved the initial draft last week." "Right," she said quickly, smoothing the edge of her notebook. "Yes, move forward." They nodded. The discussion resumed, but Elise's thoughts drifted again. Michael Turner. That was the name she'd seen stitched on the patch over his heart. Simple. Earnest. A name not meant for headlines or IPO filings. And that little girl, Emily. All gap-toothed smiles and apple-juice generosity. It wasn't just that they'd helped her, it was how natural it had all felt, like kindness was just another reflex. She stared out the window, barely hearing the next agenda item. In a city of suits and strategy, all she could see was a man with grease on his hands and a way of living that made everything she'd built suddenly feel a little hollow. The apartment was small but warm, the kind of warm that came from blankets draped over worn couches, the scent of something homemade in the air, and laughter that echoed off the kitchen walls like music. Michael had managed to throw together his famous whatever's in the fridge stew, potatoes, carrots, a handful of diced ham, and now it steamed gently in the bowls as he and Emily sat at the little round table by the window. She swung her feet beneath the chair, still too short to touch the floor, her hair messy from where she'd tugged her hat off. A half-eaten roll sat beside her bowl, forgotten for now. Her brow was furrowed in that serious way only kids can do when they're thinking about something too big for their years. "Daddy?" she asked, poking at a potato chunk with her spoon. "Yeah, Em?" "Why don't more people help?" she said, not looking up. We saw that lady today and nobody else stopped. Why is that?" Michael took a breath, the kind that carried weight behind it. He leaned back in his chair, glanced out the window where the last glow of dusk was fading behind the rooftops, and then looked at her. "Well," he said carefully, "sometimes people are in a hurry, or they think someone else will step in, or maybe they just forget how good it feels." Emily finally looked up. "Feels good to help?" He smiled. "Yeah, like deep down good. Like you did something that actually mattered." She thought about that for a moment. "Even if nobody claps for you?" Michael chuckled softly. "Especially then." She nodded solemnly, as if filing it away into the long-term memory banks where all her best truths lived. "I think I want to help more people," she said. "I think that's a wonderful plan," he replied. And as they clinked their spoons together like a toast, Michael felt something settle in his chest. A small, steady comfort that maybe, just maybe, this little world he was building was more than enough. Even if no one clapped for it. The next morning, the air was crisp with early frost, and Elise stepped out of her rental car dressed in jeans that hadn't seen a boardroom and a fleece-lined coat borrowed from her assistant's cousin, one of the few things in her life that hadn't been tailored. She wore a baseball cap pulled low, no makeup, and a scarf tucked high enough to hide most of her face. Not because she was famous, exactly, but because being recognized wasn't the point. Not today. She pushed open the sliding doors of the neighborhood Whitmore Grocers, The same one whose sign loomed over Michael Turner's apartment, the same one her family had owned for decades without ever noticing the people who actually lived beside it. Inside, the store smelled like cinnamon and cold tile. It was smaller than the flagship markets she'd designed for the city. Fewer aisles, no wine bar, no organic smoothie stations, just shelves, honest shelves, and the quiet rhythm of people trying to make the most of tight budgets and long weeks. Elise grabbed a cart and moved slowly through the produce section, eyes drifting past the apples and bruised bananas. She wasn't here to shop. Not really. She was here for him. At the end of the dairy aisle, she spotted an older clerk arranging cartons. She approached casually. "Excuse me," she said, voice light. "Do you happen to know a guy named Michael Turner? I think he works at the garage nearby." The clerk, a woman with silver curls and a name tag that read Luann, gave her a quick, skeptical glance. "Depends who's asking." "I met him yesterday," Elise said truthfully. "He helped me when my car broke down." Luann's face softened. "Sounds like Mike, all right. That man's got more kindness in one hand than most folks do in their whole body." Elise smiled. "He lives nearby?" "Just across the lot. Apartment 3B. Got a little girl, too. Emily. Sweet thing. Talks a mile a minute, just like her mom used to." The words hit Elise like a gust of cold air. Used to. She didn't ask what happened. She just nodded. "Thanks," she said gently. "I just wanted to make sure I remembered his name right." As she walked away, Luann called after her, "If you see him again, tell him he's overdue for his weekly banana bread." Elise smiled, noted it, and for the first time in years found herself wondering what banana bread baked out of love, not obligation, might actually taste like. Elise didn't notice him at first. She was in the frozen aisle, staring blankly at a wall of TV dinners she'd never actually eaten in her life, when a quiet voice behind her said, "Ms. Whitmore?" Her heart jumped. She turned slowly. A tall man in a navy polo stood by the end cap display of discounted chicken nuggets, his expression a strange mix of surprise and amusement. His name tag read, "Jared, store manager." She forced a smile. "Hi, Jared." He looked over both shoulders before stepping closer, lowering his voice. "I thought that was you. The ball cap doesn't fool me." She glanced around. A mom wrangling two kids past them without a second look. Still, Elise leaned in. "Please don't say anything." Jared crossed his arms. "You running from something or to something?" "A little of both," she replied. "I'm just—" She hesitated. "Looking into something personal, off the record." He studied her for a beat. "And let me guess. That something has a name, wears work boots, and lives across the parking lot?" Elise didn't answer. She didn't have to. Jared exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "All right. I won't say a word, but you should know, Michael's not the type who takes well to being tricked, even by omission." "I'm not tricking him," she said softly. "I just haven't told him. There's a difference." "Maybe," Jared said, eyes narrowing, "but in his world there's no gray area. The man's honest to a fault. He'd rather lose than be lied to, especially after what he's been through." "What has he been through?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jared hesitated, then shook his head. "Not my story to tell. Just be careful. Michael Turner doesn't need saving, and he sure as hell doesn't want pity." Elise nodded, a lump forming at the base of her throat. As she walked away, Jared called after her, more gently this time. "But if you're here for the right reasons, don't wait too long. Some hearts close quietly and for good." She didn't look back, but the weight of his words followed her all the way to the checkout line. The morning sun had barely crested the rooftops when Michael pulled open the garage doors, the familiar groan of metal greeting the silence like an old friend. The air still held the sharp bite of early fall, and the scent of motor oil and cold concrete settled in like it always did. He set his thermos on the workbench, took a sip of black coffee, and got to work. By 10 o'clock he had already rotated tires, replaced a battery, and diagnosed a faulty alternator. Just another day until a sleek white sedan rolled quietly up to the open bay. Michael didn't recognize the car right away. He was halfway under a truck hood when he heard the soft click of heels against pavement and a voice that made him pause. "I think it's broken again," she said. He looked up. There she was, jeans, hoodie, that same gentle presence, and holding something in a brown paper bag like it was a peace offering. "Elise," he said with a small nod, wiping his hands on a rag. "Wasn't expecting to see you again." She walked forward, setting the bag on the workbench. "I figured I owed you at least dessert." He raised an eyebrow. "Apple pie," she clarified. "From the bakery. Still warm." Michael couldn't help but smile a little. "Well, you're already in the top 1% of customers." She laughed, and it wasn't the polite kind. It was the kind that came out despite herself. "I think it's the battery again. Or the starter. Or maybe I'm just cursed." He walked around the car, popped the hood, and peered in. "Nothing looks cursed." "I was hoping it wasn't too serious," she said, watching him work. "Because I don't actually need a fix." He looked up, curious. "No?" She shook her head. "I just wanted to say thank you, properly, for the other day." He straightened, wiping his hands again. "No need." "Maybe not," she said, "but I wanted to." For a few quiet seconds, they just stood there. Two people in a garage where time seemed to slow, where pie could be currency and gratitude didn't need to be wrapped in anything more than honesty. "All right," he finally said, reaching for the bag, "but only if you let me warm this up. Emily's going to want a slice, too." Michael poured the fresh oil into the funnel, the golden stream glinting under the fluorescent lights as it disappeared into the engine. Elise sat on a stool a few feet away, legs crossed, hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee he'd offered from the garage's chipped communal thermos. The pie sat half-eaten between them on a piece of scrap cardboard they were pretending was a plate. "So," she said, eyeing the surroundings, "is this what you always dreamed of doing? Fixing cars in a dusty garage that smells like coffee and burnt rubber?" Michael chuckled, tightening the cap on the oil reservoir. "When I was a kid, I wanted to be a pilot. Didn't really understand that flying also meant being gone all the time." "And now?" she asked. "Now," he said, wiping his hands clean, "I like knowing I'll be home every night. Emily needs that. I need that." Elise nodded slowly, sipping her coffee. "That makes sense." He looked at her then, really looked. "What about you? What do you do?" She hesitated, just for a moment. Not long enough to seem suspicious, but long enough that he noticed. "Consulting," she said finally. "Business stuff. Boring, mostly." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You don't seem like the boring type." She laughed. "Good. I've worked hard to seem mysterious and mildly interesting." He grinned, leaning back against the tool cart. "Well, you're winning that game." There was a pause, comfortable and light, the kind that doesn't demand to be filled, but welcomes it when someone does. "I'm glad I broke down the other day," she said quietly. Michael glanced at her, surprised. Most people wouldn't say that. "I'm not most people," she said with a small shrug. Still, she didn't offer her last name, and he didn't ask. Not because he wasn't curious, but because some names didn't matter when you were sitting on cold stools, eating pie, and laughing about old dreams. First impressions didn't need full resumes. They just needed warmth, eye contact, and enough silence to let something real slip through. That afternoon the garage smelled faintly of cinnamon from the last slice of pie Emily had carefully devoured on a grease-streaked stool, swinging her legs as she watched her dad finish up Elise's car. Her boots, still too big, thudded softly against the cabinet beneath her. Crayons were spread across the corner of the workbench, an old invoice pad serving as her canvas. Elise watched her from across the room, arms crossed loosely, a soft smile tugging at her lips. There was something about the way Emily moved, so free, so unself-conscious, that made the noise in Elise's head quiet down. No meetings, no brand strategies, just this little girl coloring furiously in a world of her own. When Michael wiped his hands one last time and called it done, Emily hopped down and skipped over to Elise. "I made you something," she said, holding out the paper with both hands. Elise crouched instinctively, taking it as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. The drawing was simple, childlike lines and bursts of color, a garage in the background, a little girl with messy brown hair holding hands with a tall man in a baseball cap, and beside them a woman with long hair and big eyes, wearing a glowing yellow dress with wings that stretched across the page. "That's you," Emily said matter-of-factly, pointing to the winged figure. "You're our grocery angel." Elise blinked, hard. Her throat tightened so quickly it caught her off guard. "I'm your what?" she asked, voice just above a whisper. Emily beamed. "You brought pie, you made my dad smile, and you helped even though you didn't have to. That's what angels do, right?" Elise stared at the crayon wings. Big, clumsy, hopeful things. A part of her wanted to laugh. Another part almost crumbled. Michael stepped closer, curious, and glanced at the drawing. "Looks like you're officially part of the crew now." Elise swallowed hard, forcing a smile as she folded the picture carefully like it was priceless. And maybe it was, because in all her years of making things look perfect, this was the first time she'd been drawn by someone who only saw what mattered. The backpack wasn't flashy. It wasn't glittery or sparkly or covered in cartoon princesses like the other girls' bags in Emily's second-grade class. It was just bright, sunflower yellow with sturdy straps, a soft handle, and zippers that didn't stick. But what made it special wasn't the color. It was the timing. When Emily walked into her classroom that Tuesday morning, it was sitting on her desk, perfectly upright like it had been placed there with care. Her old bag had been falling apart for weeks, one strap held together with duct tape, the front pocket so frayed it barely held a pencil. Michael had promised they'd try to get a new one next paycheck, but even Emily had stopped mentioning it. She knew things were tight, knew her dad was doing his best. So when she saw the new backpack, her eyes widened and she glanced around the room, half expecting someone to jump out and say, "Surprise." But no one did. There was no tag, no receipt, no note tucked into the zipper until she opened the front pocket. Folded neatly inside was a single sheet of paper, thick and cream-colored, like the kind grown-ups used for real letters. In tidy handwriting, it read, "For someone with a very kind dad, keep being the light he already thinks you are." Emily read it 3 times before quietly tucking it back into the pocket and hugging the backpack like it might disappear. That evening, when Michael picked her up, she came bounding down the front steps with the bag bouncing behind her. "Look what I got," she said, breathless. "It just showed up." Michael blinked. "From who?" She shrugged. "No one knows, but there was a note." She handed it to him. He read it once, then again. His jaw tightened just slightly, but his eyes softened in the way they only did when something got past all his defenses. He looked around, as if expecting to find someone watching from the shadows, but there was no one, just the echo of anonymous kindness. He placed a hand on Emily's shoulder and smiled. "Well then," he said softly, "whoever they are, they've got good taste." The notice came folded in half and wedged under the door like a silent threat. Michael spotted it the moment he stepped into the apartment, still smelling like engine grease and fall wind. He picked it up slowly, read the words he already knew were coming. "Final warning. Rent due in full or vacate by end of month. Bold, cold, non-negotiable." He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he slipped the paper into the junk drawer between old batteries and expired coupons and let the drawer shut with a quiet thud. He didn't have the energy to panic. Not tonight. Emily was humming in the kitchen, perched on a stool, cutting shapes out of leftover sandwich bread with cookie cutters. Stars, hearts, one lopsided tree. "Hey, Dad," she said brightly. "I'm making lunch art for tomorrow. Do you want a heart or a dinosaur?" Michael smiled, leaning against the counter. Definitely a dinosaur. She grinned. I knew it. He watched her for a moment, her hands sticky with peanut butter, her eyes focused like it mattered more than anything else. And he couldn't tell her. Not now. Not ever, if he could help it. She deserved stars and hearts and silly sandwich dinosaurs. Not worry. Not whispered calls to landlords and second jobs that hadn't panned out. Not the reality that the garage had cut his hours again, and the overtime he used to count on had disappeared into budget adjustments. "Do we still get to do pancakes Saturday?" Emily asked suddenly, her back to him. "Of course," he said instantly. He didn't tell her the pancake mix was nearly gone, or that the gas bill hadn't been paid in 2 months, or that he'd been skipping meals at work to stretch what was left in the fridge. He just tousled her hair and kissed the top of her head like nothing in the world was wrong, because that's what fathers do. They build walls of calm around storms. They smile while the ground shifts beneath them. They say, everything's going to be fine, even when they're not sure how to make that true. And somewhere deep down, Michael believed that if he just kept going, kept showing up, kept loving her loud and steady, then maybe, somehow, it would be. Elise hadn't planned to miss the quarterly call, but there she was in her office on the 27th floor, the city skyline behind her, staring at the paused screen of the video conference she'd forgotten to join. Her assistant, Callie, stood by the door with her arms crossed, iPad in hand and concern in her eyes. "You've been dodging media requests for 3 days, Callie said, her voice low but firm. "The boards noticed. They asked if you were unwell." Elise rubbed her temple, trying to summon an excuse that didn't sound like the truth. Because the truth was complicated. The truth involved a grease-stained mechanic, a wide-eyed little girl, and the way her heart had started rearranging itself in silence. "I'm fine," she said quietly. "Just needed a little space." Callie raised an eyebrow. "Space from what? The billion-dollar empire you're supposed to be steering?" Elise didn't answer. She looked out the window instead, her reflection faint in the glass. She could still see Emily's drawing pinned beside her desk, crayon wings and crooked smiles, and it softened something sharp inside her every time she glanced at it. Callie stepped closer, her voice gentler now. "Elise, you're slipping. You don't skip investor briefings. You don't forget international calls, and you definitely don't take 3 unplanned trips to a grocery store in a town no one's heard of." Elise turned slowly. "You think I'm falling for him?" "I think you already have," Callie said, "and I think you're scared." There was a silence between them, broken only by the hum of the city and the soft ding of an unread email. "They want to install cameras in the new flagship stores," Callie added after a beat. "Full AI facial recognition, shopper analytics, the works." Elise blinked, snapped out of the fog. "What? No, that's invasive." "They say it's cutting edge, efficient, profitable." Elise shook her head. "It's not human." Callie's voice softened. "Neither is the person you used to be in those meetings." Elise looked away again, suddenly unsure of where she belonged, on the 27th floor with data charts and boardroom games, or on a cold garage stool, sharing pie and stories with someone who saw her without a name tag. And for the first time in years, the answer wasn't so clear. The garage lights flickered softly as the sun dipped below the rooftops, painting the sky in streaks of honey and charcoal. Michael was finishing up a tire rotation, sleeves rolled high, a smudge of oil on his cheek he hadn't noticed. Elise stood near the open bay door, her arms crossed, the wind tugging at her coat. She hadn't said much that day, not like before. He noticed. Of course he did. "You all right?" he asked, tightening the last lug nut before straightening up. She offered a smile, small, tight. The kind that tried to be enough, but wasn't. "Just a long week," she said. But it wasn't just a week, it was everything she hadn't told him. Everything folded up in the space between who she was and who he thought she was. He didn't know that the pie had come from her own store, that the backpack had her signature on a line item she pretended not to recognize, that every time she stepped foot in that neighborhood market, the manager stood ready to cover for her. She hadn't meant for it to go on this long. But something about him, his steadiness, his heart, his complete and utter disinterest in anything he couldn't fix with his own two hands, made her hesitate. Because once she told him, it would be over or different, and she didn't know which would be worse. Michael wiped his hands, glanced at her again. "You sure?" Elise opened her mouth, closed it. What would she even say? "Oh, hi, I'm Elise Whitmore, and I own half the cereal aisle." No, not like that. But any version of the truth felt like a betrayal now, like she'd let it go too far, and now honesty would only sting harder. "I just needed to be around something simple," she said instead, her voice barely above the sound of the wind. "And this place, it's real. You're real." Michael looked at her with something softer than suspicion, but firmer than blind trust. "You don't have to explain anything," he said, "not if you're not ready." That kindness, the exact thing she'd fallen for, only made it worse. Because love built on a lie, even a silent one, eventually shatters. And Elise Whitmore had never been more afraid of breaking something she hadn't meant to hold so close. It started with a flat tire. A local news van had pulled into the garage late one morning, steam curling from the hood, the driver muttering something about a nail, and terrible luck. Michael didn't think twice. He waved them in, swapped out the tire in under 15 minutes, and didn't charge them a dime. The cameraman, leaning against the van with his arms crossed, watched the whole thing. "You always this fast?" he asked. Michael shrugged. "Only when someone's on a deadline." The driver laughed. "You're kind of a legend around here, huh?" Michael raised an eyebrow. "Don't think legends live in garages." But by the time the tire was tightened and the van rolled out, Michael's name was scrawled into a reporter's notepad, and by dinner that night the story had aired, complete with footage of him wiping his hands, waving off payment, and gently hoisting a tricycle into the back of a pickup for a customer who couldn't lift it herself. The segment was called "The Mechanic with a Heart." It was meant to fill a few quiet minutes at the end of the broadcast, but something about it stuck. Maybe it was the simplicity. Maybe it was the quiet way Michael Turner existed in a world that no longer made space for the humble. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the little girl who popped her head into the frame at the last second and said, "That's my dad. He fixes everything." By morning, the video had gone viral, shared on community pages, tagged with words like honest, selfless, and the kind of man we need more of. Calls poured into the garage, people asking for tune-ups, teachers requesting a visit to speak to their students. A bakery offered him a year of free muffins. A local nonprofit wanted to nominate him for a kindness award. Michael was stunned. He hadn't done anything special. He'd just been him. Elise watched the clip alone in her apartment, hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. She saw the way he smiled when he talked about raising Emily, the way he said, "It's not about fixing cars. It's about helping people get where they need to go." And suddenly, she wasn't watching a news story. She was watching the man she couldn't stop falling for, broadcasted to the world. The headline hit Elise like a sucker punch to the ribs. "Grocery heiress hiding in small-town romance, CEO, Whitmore's disappearance explained." It was plastered across every news alert by mid-morning, her name trending alongside grainy stills pulled from the viral garage video, with Michael standing beside her car, his smile framed in oil stains and authenticity. Someone had leaked it. Not just her whereabouts, but everything. The backpack, the bakery pie, her 3 visits to the Maplewood store, her absence from board meetings. And worst of all, the insinuation that Elise Whitmore had been playing pretend, flirting with blue-collar charm while the real work of running an empire was left to others. She sat at the end of the massive conference table as the board filed in, each face sharper than the next. Her father's old friends, her competitors in polished shoes, and at the head of them, Charles Devon, vice chair, polite, political, ruthless. He cleared his throat before she could speak. We were all wondering what could possibly distract a CEO from 4 consecutive strategy meetings. Now we know. Elise didn't flinch. I took personal time. I earned it. Charles raised an eyebrow. You used the corporate jet to take personal time in a town where you, fell in love with a mechanic? That's not a sabbatical. That's a scandal. Murmurs rippled down the table. She could feel the weight of every whispered judgment, but it was the word scandal that stuck. She opened her mouth to respond, but someone else spoke first. Callie, standing near the back, stepped forward. You all say you want human leadership, authenticity. That's what she's doing. Charles didn't even look at her. This is bigger than optics. The Whitmore brand is about trust, consistency, tradition. What happens when the face of that brand walks away for a man who changes oil and teaches his daughter kindness with crustless sandwiches? Elise's voice was calm when she finally spoke. Then maybe we've misunderstood what our brand really stands for. But the damage was done. The board had tasted blood. The press had a story. And somewhere in a quiet town, a man who still didn't know the truth was about to wake up to a version of her she never wanted him to see. And Elise knew she was out of time. Michael sat on the tailgate of his truck, legs stretched out in the sun, a sandwich in one hand, and Emily curled beside him, her feet dangling, swinging back and forth like she was trying to kick the sky. It was their usual lunch spot, just behind the garage, where the noise faded and the sunlight hit warm against the metal siding. Emily munched happily on apple slices, humming a tune she swore she made up herself. Michael took a slow bite of his sandwich, reached for his phone, and opened the news without thinking. Just a scroll, just a way to fill the quiet between bites. But the headline stopped him cold. Grocery heiress hiding in small-town romance. CEO Elise Whitmore's disappearance explained. He blinked, read it again and again. There was a photo, not just of her, but of them. Elise standing next to the Phantom, smiling as he handed her the keys. Another shot of her holding Emily's drawing outside the garage. A zoomed-in clip of their quiet private moment turned into spectacle. The sandwich slid from his hand. Emily looked up. Dad? He couldn't speak, couldn't look away from the screen. Elise Whitmore. Whitmore. The name stamped on the side of the grocery store he parked beside every night. The name on the letterhead of every flyer, every sale sign. The name he had never once connected to the woman in the hoodie who brought pie and asked about his dreams like they mattered. His jaw tightened. The lie wasn't that she was someone important. It was that she'd never told him at all. Emily reached for his hand, confused. Is that our Elise? Michael finally set the phone down. He looked at his daughter, her bright eyes full of innocence and trust, and nodded slowly. Yeah, kiddo. I guess it is. He stood without another word, brushing the crumbs from his jeans, his heart thudding louder than any engine he'd ever rebuilt. The worst part wasn't that she was Elise Whitmore. The worst part was that she hadn't trusted him enough to say it. Elise sat alone in the back seat of a black town car, her phone clutched in both hands like it might break if she squeezed too hard. The city lights outside blurred against the windows as the driver navigated traffic, but Elise didn't see any of it. Her focus was narrowed to one name on the screen, Michael Turner. Her thumb hovered over the call button for several seconds before she pressed it. 1 ring, 2, 3. Her heart was pounding so loud she almost didn't hear the click on the other end. But it wasn't Michael's voice. It was small, quiet, familiar. Hello? Elise froze. Emily? There was a pause long enough to carry 1,000 questions. Elise swallowed hard. It's Elise. Is your dad there? Another pause. Then nothing. Just silence. Emily, can you hear me? Still nothing. But Elise didn't hang up. She couldn't. "I know this probably doesn't make sense," she said, her voice trembling. "And I know it feels like I lied. But I didn't mean to. I didn't come to Maplewood to trick anyone. I didn't plan any of this. I just—" She exhaled shakily. "I just wanted to be someone real for once. And I didn't know how to tell the truth without ruining everything." The line stayed quiet. "Elle, sweetheart, please tell your dad I'm sorry, and that I never meant to hide from him, or from you." Still no reply. "I miss you," Elise added softly. "Both of you." Then the call dropped. No click, no goodbye. Just silence. She stared at the screen, her own reflection staring back. Too polished, too clean, too far removed from the garage, from the pie, from the laughter and crayons and sandwich dinosaurs. On the other end, Emily held the phone in her lap, staring at the wall. Michael stood a few feet away, arms crossed, unreadable. "She said she's sorry," Emily whispered. Michael said nothing, and the silence between them said everything Elise had hoped it never would. Michael walked into the store with a shopping list folded in his back pocket and a stiffness in his shoulders that hadn't been there the week before. The automatic doors slid open like they always did, and the air inside was still cold, still smelled faintly like floor polish and produce. But something was different. It was too quiet, too still. A cashier looked up from scanning cereal boxes and froze for half a second before smiling a little too quickly. A woman by the flower display nudged her friend and whispered behind her hand. A manager near the meat section nodded with the kind of forced normalcy people use when they're trying not to act like they know something. Michael kept walking. He passed the shelves with silent precision, filling his cart slowly. Bread, peanut butter, bananas that were still green, like always. But the air felt heavier, not judgmental, just watched. Before, he was the guy everyone waved to, the one who fixed your tail light for half price, who donated his old tools to the high school shop class, who handed out popsicles in summer from a cooler in his truck bed. Now he was the mechanic, the one from the story, the one with the CEO, the one everyone had opinions about. He rolled past the bakery and caught a glimpse of himself in the reflective glass, jaw tight, eyes low. He hadn't shaved in a few days. Sleep had been fitful, full of half-formed memories and words that didn't feel like lies until he found out what they meant. At checkout, the girl behind the counter scanned his items in silence. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "For what it's worth, I think what she did was brave." Michael looked up. Her eyes were kind, young, hopeful. He gave a small nod, didn't say a word. When he walked out with his bag, the cart rattling slightly on the cracked concrete, he realized it was the first time the store had ever felt unfamiliar, like the world had shifted just a little. And nothing, not the groceries, not the faces, not even the sunlight, fit quite the same way anymore. The elementary school gym smelled like glue sticks and optimism. Fold-out tables lined the walls, piled high with canned beans, cereal boxes, and mismatched pasta donations. Paper signs written in crayon hung from the rafters. Help feed Maplewood, kindness counts, and one can equal one smile. Emily had drawn one of them herself, a stick-figure family holding a giant soup can above their heads like a trophy. Michael stood in the back, arms crossed, trying to stay invisible. He hadn't planned on coming, but Emily had begged him, said her class was helping organize the donations, and she wanted him there to see the mountain of peanut butter jars she personally stacked. He couldn't say no, not to her. What he didn't expect was the whisper that traveled through the room like a wind no one wanted to name. "Did you hear? Whitmore Foundation sent a truckload. Boxes, pallets, no press, just showed up this morning. No logo, no check ceremony, just anonymous." Michael's stomach turned. He knew exactly who'd done it. He watched as kids darted between tables, carting donations with giggles and determination. Teachers smiled, parents clapped. Emily beamed when she spotted him and waved so hard her whole arm swayed. He smiled back, but it didn't quite reach his eyes, and then she walked in. No fanfare, no entourage. Elise stood just inside the gym doors, dressed in jeans, hair tied back, hands clenched into fists at her sides like she wasn't sure if she should stay. Michael saw her the moment she arrived. Their eyes locked across the gym, just for a second, but it hit like a storm. All the unspoken things, the apology she hadn't been allowed to finish, the anger he hadn't wanted to feel, the ache that hadn't gone anywhere. She didn't move, she didn't approach. She just watched as Emily led her classmates to the growing wall of boxes and raised her hand high when the teacher asked who had collected the most items. Michael turned back to the table, gripping the edge a little tighter. She had shown up anyway, not for him, not even to be seen, just to make sure the food was real, that the help made it, that the little girl who believed in grocery angels still had reason to believe. The fundraiser had started to wind down. Parents gathered backpacks, teachers herded stragglers, and the gym slowly emptied of chatter and motion. Michael stayed near the back, eyes scanning for Emily, as volunteers packed up the last of the cans. But Emily wasn't by the tables. She was outside. The cold air met her cheeks as she stepped around the building, her boots crunching lightly on the gravel path behind the gym. That's when she saw her, Elise, standing alone near the edge of the school's old greenhouse, hands deep in her coat pockets, head tilted to the sky like she was waiting for it to forgive her. Emily stopped a few feet away, tugging at the sleeve of her sweater. "You didn't come inside." Elise turned, startled. Her face softened when she saw who it was. Didn't want to cause a scene. Emily took a slow step closer. "Are you still the grocery angel?" The question wasn't loaded. It wasn't suspicious. It was just honest. Like everything Emily ever said, Elise crouched so they were eye level, her breath curling in the cold between them. "I don't know," she said. "I used to be." Emily tilted her head. "Well, I still think you are." Elise blinked. "Even after everything?" Emily shrugged, like the mess of adults didn't bother her much. "You brought food. You made my dad laugh again. You're not perfect. But he's not either, and I don't want to pick sides." Elise's throat tightened. "You shouldn't have to." Emily stepped forward and gently placed her mitten-covered hand on Elise's. "Then come home." It wasn't a demand. It was an invitation. The kind only a child could give with no conditions. "I don't know if he wants me to," Elise whispered. "Maybe," Emily said, squeezing her hand, "but I think he still hopes you will." The wind moved around them, soft and sure. Elise looked down at the girl whose drawing still lived in her purse, crumpled and creased, but never thrown away. And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, Elise felt something steady return, something like grace. Maybe even home. The porch light buzzed overhead, its flicker casting a soft pulse across the weathered steps, the kind of light that never quite burned out, but always threatened to. Michael sat on the top step, one foot planted on the porch, the other resting on the railing, a mug of lukewarm coffee in his hands. He wasn't waiting. Not really. But when he heard the soft crunch of gravel from the sidewalk, he didn't look surprised. Elise stepped into the glow slowly, her breath visible in the night air. No makeup, no blazer, just a navy sweater, jeans, and eyes that looked heavier than the last time he'd seen them. "Hey," she said, quiet. Michael nodded, scooting slightly to the side. "You still remember the way." She climbed the steps without asking and sat down beside him. Not too close, not too far. Just enough space for the air to fill in what neither of them had the words for yet. "I didn't come to lie," she said after a moment. "I know." He didn't say it kindly. He didn't say it with anger either, just truth. "I wanted to tell you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "But the longer I waited, the harder it got. And I kept thinking, if I told you, it would change how you looked at me." Michael looked down at his mug, thumb brushing over a small chip on the rim. "It did." She swallowed hard. "But not the way you think," he added. She turned to him slowly. "I wasn't angry because of who you are," he said. "I was angry because I didn't get the chance to choose to know you anyway." The words landed heavy, real. "I just wanted a real life for a second," she admitted. "No titles, no pressure, just pie and garages and people who fix things instead of break them." Michael exhaled through his nose, then finally looked at her, then stopped running from that. The porch light flickered again, buzzing, sputtering, steady, and for the first time in a long time, there were no headlines, no last names, no borrowed identities, just two people under one light, trying to be enough, trying finally to begin again. It was a quiet Thursday morning when Emily found the letter. She was halfway through her peanut butter sandwich in the school cafeteria, legs swinging beneath the bench, when something crinkled inside her lunchbox. Nestled between her napkin and a granola bar was a small, folded piece of cream-colored stationery, smooth and thick, like the kind her teacher used for thank-you notes. On the front, in soft handwriting, it said, "Give this to your dad." She didn't open it, just stared for a second, then tucked it carefully into her coat pocket like it might blow away if she moved too fast. That evening, when she got home, she didn't say anything right away. She just walked up to Michael, who was elbow-deep in laundry and quiet thoughts, and handed it over without a word. He looked at it, then at her. "She said it's for you," Emily said. And then she walked off to her room, like she somehow knew this wasn't hers to hear. Michael sat down slowly, the basket of clean clothes forgotten beside him. The paper felt heavier than it looked. He opened it. "Michael, I didn't know how to say it, so I wrote it instead, because some truths land better in ink than in air. I came to Maplewood to disappear, but then I met you. And you made me feel like someone worth finding." I lied by omission. I hid behind convenience. But I never once lied about how I felt when I was with you. Every laugh, every late-night pie slice, every quiet minute in that garage, they were the most honest parts of me I've ever known. I never wanted to be special. I've had that all my life. What I wanted was to be seen, not for a name or a bank account, but for the parts of me I'm still trying to love. And somehow, you saw those first. I understand if you can't forgive me, but I had to try, because love without truth is just performance. And what I felt for you was the first thing in a long time that didn't feel like acting. Tell Emily I'm still saving a slice of pie for her. Always, Elise. Michael read it once, then twice, and for the first time in days, something inside him softened, just a little, just enough. The garage was quiet after hours, just the slow creak of cooling metal and the occasional whisper of wind slipping through the cracked bay doors. Michael stood beneath the hood of an old Buick, hands still stained from a long day's work. He hadn't planned on reading the letter again, but it was there, folded carefully in the pocket of his flannel shirt, just over his heart, waiting. He slipped it out and unfolded it slowly, careful not to smudge the paper. The overhead light buzzed softly above him, casting a warm halo onto the page, turning ink into something almost alive. "I came to Maplewood to disappear." His lips moved slightly as he reread the words. Not aloud, just enough to feel them again. Her handwriting was steady, elegant, and yet full of restraint, like every line was holding something back, trembling beneath control. But then I met you." He paused there, let the words settle. The Buick's engine ticked beside him, cooling into silence. He wasn't a man who cried easily, but there was something about this, about the contrast of grease on his fingers and the softness of her words, that cracked through the armor. It wasn't just the apology, it was the way she admitted wanting to be seen, and the way she admitted that he had done it without even trying. That got him, because he knew what that kind of invisibility felt like. For years, he'd been the guy people passed by, the one who fixed things but never got fixed himself. And now this woman, this impossible, unreachable woman, had chosen to tell him the ugliest truth in the most beautiful way, not with power, but with paper. He folded the letter gently, wiped his hands on a nearby rag, and slid it back into his pocket. Then he leaned against the car, staring up at the light above, blinking as it flickered once, twice, and held steady. In that still, sacred quiet, he didn't feel like the guy who'd been lied to anymore. He just felt like a man holding something true. The press conference was scheduled for noon, but the room was packed by 11. Reporters, board members, regional managers, all waiting for a statement no one expected, and few were prepared to understand. Elise Whitmore stood behind the podium, flanked by the towering signage of a brand her family had built over generations. Whitmore Grocers, a name known in every corner of the country, a name synonymous with tradition, scale, and silent polished power. But today, it was the past. She took a slow breath, fingers steadying the papers before her that she wouldn't end up reading from. "I've spent most of my life running a company that knew everything about efficiency," she began, her voice calm, measured. "We tracked foot traffic, calculated basket values, designed layouts based on impulse and shelf psychology. We were great at knowing what people would buy." She paused, then looked out over the sea of suits and cameras. "But somewhere along the way, we forgot to see the people who shopped there. We forgot trust. We forgot kindness." Murmurs echoed through the room. She didn't stop. "So today, I'm stepping down as CEO of Whitmore Grocers. But before I go, there's one final change I'm making." A screen behind her lit up. The iconic Whitmore logo faded into something simpler. Bold text, hand-drawn flourishes. Below it, a new name appeared. Turner Markets, built on trust. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elise didn't flinch. "Michael Turner didn't ask for this. He doesn't even know. But he reminded me, through one act of selfless help, one refusal to take $1 for a favor, that people aren't just customers. They're neighbors. They're worth more than price points. And I want every store that bears this name to remember what trust looks like in action." A reporter raised his hand. "Why Turner? Why his name?" Elise smiled, something soft and certain in her eyes. "Because it's the only name I've ever seen carry value without needing to be printed on a label." And with that, she walked away from the podium, not with regret, but with freedom, and the quiet hope that somewhere in a small-town garage, a man with oil on his hands might see the news and finally understand what he'd always been worth. It went up on a Tuesday morning, just after sunrise, when the light was gold and the streets of Maplewood were still shaking off the quiet of sleep. Michael stood in front of the garage with a mug of coffee warming his hands, watching as 2 workers on ladders drilled the final bolts into place. The old sign, rusted, crooked, and barely legible, had been taken down the day before. It had said Harrison's Auto for nearly 20 years, even long after Old Man Harrison had moved to Florida. But today something new gleamed in its place. Turner and Whitmore Honest Auto Service comes first. The letters were carved into reclaimed oak, sanded smooth but left imperfect, the grain visible like quiet fingerprints. Beneath the main name, the tagline stretched clean and proud across the wood. Simple words, but enough to stop a passerby in their tracks. Michael didn't say much as the crew packed up. He just nodded his thanks and ran a hand across the edge of the sign like it might dissolve if he didn't touch it first. It was heavier than it looked. He could feel that even now. He hadn't asked for it. He hadn't known it was coming. But Elise had. She'd sent a letter not long after the press conference telling him the name change was just the beginning, that real stories deserved places where people could see them, where honesty wasn't a slogan, it was a promise. He still didn't know what it meant for the 2 of them, but he knew what it meant for Maplewood, for the little boys who brought in their bikes with bent wheels, for the single moms who needed a brake job and a little breathing room on the bill, for the farmers with rusted-out trucks and tight seasons. It meant something had changed. Emily arrived just in time to see the last ladder come down. She looked up, wide-eyed, and grinned. "It's both your names now." Michael smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. "Yeah," he said softly, "it is." And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was holding someone else's place in the world. He was exactly where he belonged. The first time Elise showed up on a Sunday, Michael raised an eyebrow, like he hadn't expected it. Like it was some kind of coincidence. Like her pushing a cart through the automatic doors of Turner Markets at exactly 10:02 a.m. wasn't already penciled into both of their routines. But by the third Sunday, the act was wearing thin. Emily was the only one who dropped the pretense. "She's here!" she yelled from the cereal aisle, waving both arms like she was signaling a lifeguard. "Dad, she's in aisle 4. Michael peeked around the end cap, a box of granola bars in one hand and a smirk playing on his lips. Elise was already smiling, a bunch of bananas in her cart and a bag of flour balanced precariously beside a loaf of sourdough Emily had sworn tasted like clouds. "Well, would you look at that," Michael said, pretending to be stunned. "The mystery woman returns." Elise leaned on the cart. "Crazy how I keep ending up in your grocery store." "Almost like you know someone who works here," he said, nodding toward the bakery counter where a picture of Emily's fundraiser poster now hung in a frame. Emily, meanwhile, had already climbed halfway into the cart, chattering nonstop about school and dinosaurs and how she'd decided her new favorite food was canned peaches, but only the kind Elise bought. These Sunday runs had become their rhythm, not planned, not formal, just a quiet routine, wrapped in small talk and shared shopping lists that kept growing to include things like her favorite coffee and his favorite cheese. They never made a big deal of it, but the town had started to notice. People smiled a little wider when they passed. The cashier always made sure they ended up in the same line. And Michael? He stopped pretending it was all coincidence after a while. Because Elise didn't just bring groceries. She brought steadiness, laughter, something real. And every Sunday, as the cart rolled to the checkout with Emily riding like a queen and Michael feigning surprise, he realized something important. Home wasn't just a place. Sometimes it was a cart with 3 hands on the handle. It was a Sunday like any other, at least on the surface. The usual rhythm hummed through the Turner Markets, the clink of carts, the chatter of neighbors, the soft overhead music that hadn't changed in years. Michael walked just a step behind Elise and Emily, pretending to compare brands of oatmeal, though his eyes weren't really on the shelves. He had barely slept the night before. The ring sat tucked inside the child seat of the cart, right where Emily usually rode. This time she was walking ahead, skipping every third step, oblivious to the plan unfolding behind her. Elise reached for a box of granola, her other hand resting casually on the cart's handle. Michael's voice stopped her. "You know," he said, clearing his throat, "we've been doing this grocery dance for a while now." She smiled without turning. "Is that what you call it?" He nodded, taking a slow step closer. "I've realized something." She turned then, catching the shift in his tone. "What's that?" "That somewhere between canned peaches and aisle 6, I stopped wanting a quiet life alone." Her eyes widened slightly, just as he reached into the child seat and pulled out the small square box nestled between 2 plastic dinosaurs Emily had insisted they buy. Elise blinked. Then he dropped to one knee. Right there, between the cereal and the oatmeal under flickering lights and the soft scent of powdered sugar from the nearby bakery, Michael Turner held out a ring. Simple, silver, honest, just like him. "Elise Whitmore," he said, steady and sure. "I didn't fall for the woman on the magazine covers. I fell for the one who brought pie to my garage, who let my daughter draw her with wings, who saw me when I didn't know I needed to be seen." He opened the box. "So what do you say? Make this the only aisle we ever have to walk alone in again?" Elise stood frozen, hands to her mouth. Emily gasped from behind, dropping a can of peaches in pure dramatic flair. "Say yes!" And through a rush of laughter, tears, and aisle 6 applause from eavesdropping strangers, Elise nodded, laughing as she said, "Yes, yes, absolutely." Because some rings don't need candles or violin quartets, just a cart, a cereal aisle, and the one person who made every aisle feel like home. The sun was setting behind the hills when Emily, now grown, sat on the front porch swing of the farmhouse just outside Maplewood, a mug of cocoa in her hands and two curious faces peeking up at her from the steps below. Her daughter, all wild curls and grass-stained jeans, asked the question with wide eyes. "Is it true, Mom, that Grandpa met Grandma at the store?" Emily smiled, the kind that pulls from memory like it's folded into the bones. "It's true." The little boy beside her wrinkled his nose. "But how? Grandma's like fancy, and Grandpa fixes tractors." She let out a soft laugh. It wasn't about fancy or tractors. It started with spilled groceries, a broken paper bag in a parking lot. My dad saw a woman struggling and helped. No questions, no expectations. The kids leaned in. They'd heard parts of the story before, but never like this. He thought she was just a regular lady with a bad battery and a sweet smile, Emily continued. What he didn't know was that she owned the whole store, the whole chain, actually. Their jaws dropped. She let them sit in that wonder for a second. But Grandma didn't want to be seen for that. She wanted someone who saw her, not the money, not the name, just her. And Dad did, without even trying. She looked out toward the road where the garage still stood. A new sign now hung beside it. Turner and Whitmore Family Auto, run by her cousin and still trusted by every soul in town. "Did he get mad when he found out?" her daughter asked. Emily shook her head. He got quiet, hurt. But he read her letter under the hood light after work. And when he showed up for groceries the next Sunday, he smiled like nothing had changed, even though everything had. She leaned back, sipping her cocoa. "Love's funny that way. It doesn't always start with fireworks. Sometimes it starts with apple juice and a broken radiator." The little boy grinned. "So Grandpa fell in love with a secret billionaire?" Emily smiled wide, eyes shining. He didn't just fall for her. She looked toward the fading sky. He helped a woman with groceries. Turns out she owned the store and his heart, too.